over 600,000 gallons, every single second. To the millions who stand at the rail, staring into the abyss, Niagara Falls is a spectacle of chaotic, natural beauty. They feel the mist on their faces. They feel the ground tremble. They believe they are seeing the whole story. They're only seeing half of it. The rest isn't in the water crashing down. It's in the silence underneath. Buried beneath the bedrock lies a vast, overlooked lattice of chambers built, sealed, and slowly erased from public attention. Not by conspiracy, by indifference. This is the machine beneath the falls. Go back 200 years. Before the neon lights and the tourism boards, Niagara was a wild frontier. But while explorers saw majesty, a different breed of men saw something else: wasted potential. To the industrialist, that crashing water was kinetic energy, bleeding away into the mist. The siege of Niagara didn't begin with skyscrapers. It began in the dark. Local folklore speaks of midnight diggers, men allegedly working trenches under the cover of darkness, concealing their progress from rival landowners. Whether these accounts are exaggerated or not, the archaeological record is clear. Narrow channels were cut into the stone to divert mere trickles of the river. They were crude experiments, scars in the bedrock, but they proved a hypothesis that would reshape the region. The river could be tamed. And once that realization took hold, the digging didn't stop. It just went deeper. By the 1850s, the era of secrecy gave way to the era of brute force. The Falls Hydraulics Power Company began an operation that would fundamentally destabilize the ground beneath the growing city. They weren't digging ditches anymore. They were carving arteries. Workers, armed with little more than pickaxes and volatile blasting powder, descended into the dolomite. These early tunnels were claustrophobic nightmares, often only 8 feet high, prone to sudden collapses and catastrophic flooding. The risk was calculated, but the cost was high. If a gradient was off by a fraction of a degree, the water would stall or surge with enough pressure to blow the tunnel walls apart. A subterranean network began to metastasize beneath the factories, paper mills, chemical plants, flour operations. They all tapped into this underground bloodline. Above ground, the city looked normal. Below, men commuted through damp, rat-infested corridors, moving from wheel pit to wheel pit, navigating an industrial city that existed entirely in the dark. Mechanical power had a fundamental limit. You couldn't ship a spinning water wheel to Buffalo. The late 19th century demanded something new: electricity that could travel. And Niagara became the proving ground. The question wasn't whether to electrify the falls. It was how. Thomas Edison championed direct current, a system that lost power over distance. But Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse proposed alternating current, which could transmit energy across vast distances with minimal loss. The Adams Power Plant project would settle the debate. To make it work, engineers needed more than a tunnel. They needed a cathedral. They carved a tail-race passage over 20 feet high, driving deep into the gorge wall. This was precision engineering performed with brute force. Tens of thousands of gallons would rush through this void every second, and a structural failure would be catastrophic. The horseshoe shape wasn't aesthetic. It was physics. The curved ceiling distributed the crushing weight of the bedrock above, preventing collapse under pressure that would have flattened the rectangular tunnel. On November 16, 1896, the switch was thrown. Buffalo lit up, powered by current generated 20 miles away. The world celebrated the dawn of electrical transmission, but few paused to acknowledge the hollow void that made it possible: a silent, rushing river beneath the feet of the celebrating crowds. Physics ignores borders, but politics does not. Canadian officials watched the American siphon flow from the shared river and recognized an uncomfortable truth. Water diverted upstream meant less power available downstream. If they didn't claim their share, the current and the economic advantage would belong to their neighbors. The Ontario Power Company responded with a project of staggering ambition. They didn't just dig, they fortified. Immigrant laborers, Italians, Poles, Hungarians toiled in freezing, damp conditions to construct tunnels stretching over 2,000 feet. They reinforced soft, unstable rock with millions of bricks, laid by hand, layer by painstaking layer. These weren't temporary excavations. They were monuments designed to endure for centuries. Massive steel gates allowed operators to throttle the river's flow, diverting water on demand. For a brief moment in history, engineers had wrapped their hands around the throat of Niagara Falls. They could choose how much of the river would crash over the edge and how much would be swallowed by the machines below. Technology is unsentimental. As the 20th century advanced, efficiency improved. Centralized power grids replaced the localized mill networks. Hydroelectric plants consolidated, and the smaller, older systems became redundant. One by one, the great tunnels were sealed. Debris clogged the intakes. Some passages were deliberately filled with rubble to prevent the streets above from collapsing into the void. The subterranean empire went dark. The scream of turbines faded into echoes and then into silence. For decades, the tunnels were local curiosities mentioned in historical footnotes, occasionally referenced in engineering surveys, but largely inaccessible. Until 2018. That year, a coordinated team of engineers and industrial archaeologists received permission to conduct a formal survey of the sealed Ontario Power Company infrastructure. They expected deterioration. Collapsed roofs, flooded passages. What they found was a time capsule. Massive chambers stood in near-perfect preservation, protected by the cool, stable air. Rusted machinery waited in position, frozen mid-operation. The survey revealed a sprawling, interconnected world that exceeded what existing documentation had suggested. Tunnels linking rival power stations, unexpected bypass channels, and evidence of ad hoc expansions never formally recorded. Standing in those silent vaults, the researchers described a profound stillness. The roar of the falls, omnipresent on the surface, was muffled here to a low vibration. They were standing inside an ambition that the modern world had simply walked away from. Today, millions of tourists line the rails, mesmerized by the water crashing over the edge. They see the power of nature on full display. What they don't see is the infrastructure beneath their feet: the tunnels, the wheel pits, the cathedral-sized voids carved by hand over a century ago. It isn't hidden, it's simply overlooked. The information is available. The entrances are documented, but nobody looks down. The falls create the spectacle. But the machine beneath them tells a different story, one of ambition, exploitation, and a silent empire that most visitors will never know exists beneath their feet.